Hello, this is Roger Capello. I'm bringing you My Week at the Club, episode number 42, and a game that I played this past Wednesday at the Wachusett Chess Club in Fitchburg, Mass. I played it against Paul Godin, who's very close to my strength, and he had white, I had black. It was an interesting game, I guess, and I'd be happy to show it to you. But before I do, I wanted to show you briefly, get a little pop-up notice there, a little astronomy tidbit of the day. As you can see over on the middle panel there, I have the Hubble Deep Field, or the Extreme Deep Field rather, Extreme Deep Field 2. And it's showing you some very distant galaxies, but of course they aren't the most distant galaxies. And I recently heard somebody talking about the number of particles in the universe. They're making some, actually it was a reference to a big number, and they said if all the particles in the universe were chess pieces and yada, 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 went on with that. And it got me to thinking about, well, how do you make that estimate of how many particles in the universe are there? And it's pretty easy, or fairly straightforward for an astronomer to figure out roughly how many particles there are in a galaxy. But how many galaxies are there? How big is the universe? And that's a not such an easy question. In fact, the universe might be infinite. And what people really mean when they say the size of the universe is they're talking about what astronomers would call the observable universe, which is that part of the universe that's, at least in principle, accessible to us. Now, due to the limit of the speed of light, anything that is farther away than a certain distance wouldn't have had time. Light from that location would not have had time to reach us by the current day, even if it was sent out at the very beginning birth of the universe 13.8 billion years ago. So the observable universe is a very large sphere of space centered on the Earth, with a radius you might naively think of 13.8 billion light years. That anything within 13.8 billion light years, that light would get to us by now. It's not quite that simple because space has been expanding since the birth of the universe, and it's been stretching. And it's actually, we're finding out now that it's accelerating even at great distances. And so the actual size of the universe in something that is called a co-moving frame is thought to be about 46 billion light years in radius, or 93 billion light years in diameter, which is somewhat larger than what you might think. So it's the light was emitted when it was closer to us, but then the universe has expanded since that time. So that's how that happens. Anyhow, that's the observable universe, and it's a pretty thing to observe when you have an instrument like the Hubble taking some very long exposures, and you can see all those galaxies. So here's a game I played against Paul. It turned out to be in English, a Anglo-Indian variation according to the classification system that ChessX uses. He opened with knight f3. We've gone into a line similar to this a number of times. I responded with knight f6 and went into an Indian formation. And as you can see in my note there, I've actually got a rather poor record in this variation, and I'm not quite sure why I keep playing it. I think I should learn some other lines to play against the English. But this was sort of inertia. This was the tried and trusted path, so I went ahead and took it. Maybe it shouldn't have been so trusted. So it turns out Paul fianchettos also, and I went into a sort of a double fianchetto setup, and the reason for that was to blunt his bishop on g2. So he's got this nice, well-posted bishop, but I have a counter bishop. Now that brings in some interesting tactics. Particularly my bishop can be weaker than his because it's not defended by anything. Not currently, and for a while it won't be defended by things. So there are possible tactics if this knight moves away, say attacking something valuable like a queen or a king. Okay, I continued on with, sorry, it was White's turn. He continued on with d3, and we got this central pawn formation after I fianchettoed, and we both castled. He played his knight to d2, and I played with d6, and now he's threatening to expand on the queen side with b4, and I didn't really want to allow that because I could easily see with his light squared bishop and the rook on the b file that I would come under pressure, that this b pawn might come under attack and then the bishop behind it. So I played a restraining move, a prophylactic move with a5 to at least make it a little harder, thinking that if he wanted to prepare his move that he might do something such as a3, in which case I could play a4, and then he would never get that b4 move in. If he ever tried to get it in, I would take just en passant, and no matter how he takes back here, he has an isolated and possibly weak a pawn. So that was the thinking behind the restraining it with a5, and he immediately responded with b3. Having no real interest, it appears, in expanding further on the queen side, but instead working to develop this dark squared bishop on either b2 or a3. I developed my knight on d7, thinking that it would prove most useful there, given the pawn structure that I thought was going to come about. It looked like, we're fighting for the light squares with our two bishops here and his pawns. I have a pretty good clamp on the dark squares right now, but I thought I might be able to post my knight on c5 and be able to keep it there for a while. So he did go ahead and develop his bishop to b2, and I played e5, and now we've got this central pawn formation, but there's no tension yet. There aren't any pawns threatening to take one another, and there are various pawn breaks that could develop from this situation. At some point he might play d4, he might play, after some preparation, quite a bit of preparation, he could play c5. That's a bit harder to get in. After some preparation, possibly he could get in b4, although like I said, I'm attempting to restrain that. But he could play a3 and then b4. He could play e4, which is not really a pawn break, but a possible pawn formation, and he could play f4 as well. Similarly, I have a number of, I have breaks with all my pawns. This pawn can go to e4. At some point, I could play d4 or d5, and even f5 is a possible. F5 followed by either f4 or e4. So there's a whole lot of ways. The center is very fluid, and a whole lot of ways I could develop. Paul continued his development with queen to d2, and I moved my knight to c5, which is what I had in mind before. And right now it's a fairly good post because without some work he can't kick it with b4. It's that b4 square is covered by me. Similarly, if he tries to chase my knight away with d4, I have my e pawn that can take that. So instead, he looks to be playing on the flank with a3 and trying to open up the b file. I played my rook to the e file because I wanted to support a possible pawn break of e4. And he went ahead and did do that b4 pawn break. So a trade took place, AB, AB. And I came back, dropped back with my knight to what looked like a pretty good square. The knight on e6 is threatening now to, at some point, come into d4, possibly attacking his queen, although he has pretty good control over d4 right now. He has the bishop and knight both. But he decided to get better control over it, so he played e3. And this also supports the idea of a future d4 pawn break on his part. So I played queen to e7, which is an okay move. It's hard to see, it's going to take a while before I can make any of those pawn breaks that I was talking about. So at least this connects my rooks. Really wasn't until the next move, after Paul challenged me on the A file, that I went along a very dubious path. And what I did was, I looked at a line that I thought was going to allow me to win the A file. And I sat here analyzing the position for a while. I don't know exactly how long, but several minutes, and decided that I had a little string of moves that would leave me in possession of the A file. And I initiated it with queen to A8. And the problem is that, as you'll see, is that this whole concept has a flaw in it, which I didn't see until too late. So I played the queen to F8. Now, if the queen were stuck there, that's not a great square for it. I mean, it's out of the way, but then again, it's not very active. There is the potential to discover an attack on this undefended B pawn, but it was attacking. It had that undiscovered back a move ago. When it was on E7 here, it was already attacking this B pawn when this D pawn moves. So I didn't gain anything by that. And all I really did was to cut down the mobility of my queen. But if my idea had worked, it would have been fine. And the idea was simply to force my presence on the A file. Now, Paul had a good response to that. He struck back in the center, and I should have reevaluated at this point and gone down a different path than I did, that would properly address his central demonstration. I could have traded the E pawns, maybe. One thing that comes to mind. But instead, I went ahead and pulled the trigger on this little combination. Well, okay. Forgot what I had played. I did exchange off the E pawns first, but then rather than continuing to play in the center, which might have been a good idea, I went ahead and exchanged on the A file. And the idea here was to trade off the rooks and then immediately challenge his rook with my rook. Now, if he had played rook takes rook, I would happily take back with my queen, and I would have been, very happy with that position. But he didn't do that. Instead, he played d5, and this is a doubly good move for white, and really shows the weakness in my plan, because it not only shuts down my idea of how to take over the A file, but it also causes my knight discomfort and blocks off my bishop from using this diagonal that I thought it was going to be good on. Unfortunately, I went ahead and traded off rooks and then attacked with my queen, which was my idea way back in the 18th move. And you might ask, why did I do this? Because what happens, of course, is that he plays bishop takes knight. And now I just lost a piece. I have to take it back. And now he has time to win my knight on e6. Right? Well, what I was expecting was something like bishop to c3, or maybe bishop to b2. And that's what I expected back on the 18th move. And I kind of pulled the rookie mistake of not reanalyzing the position after some exchanges had taken place. Why did I do this? I thought about it afterward, and I think it's because if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I very often get into time pressure. And I'm working hard at trying not to do that, and trying not to think when the moves are obvious, trying to kind of come up with quick moves. But in this case, the move you know, it would have been worth a few seconds. I have 100 minutes for the game. That averages out to at least 2 minutes per move or so. It would have been worth 5 seconds or so just looking at the position. After I played queen at a8, well, it was before that really. After I exchanged 2 pairs of rooks, I have a piece on piece here on e6, and I should have, even if my spidey sense wasn't tingling, as Yasser likes to say, I should at least have re-examined it for possible tactics. Oh well, enough on that. I blew it, but unfortunately, this gives away the game because it's a whole piece, and it's a piece for. After he takes the knight, I get the pawn back, so it's a piece for a pawn. I think Stockfish evaluated it at something like plus 3.7 at this point. So oh, there it is. Yeah. So Black's, simply lost, and it's very hard to see how to stir up enough counterplay. I tried valiantly, but unsuccessfully to stir up any really meaningful counterplay. So Paul centralized his queen, which is a good move in such a position. And I came down, checked the king, but he just drops back with the knight. And when I attack the weak B pawn, he just pushes it, freezing my pawns on the dark squares. And the problem is all of his pieces are protected. The only one that's not protected right now is the queen, but all of his other pieces are protected by something. I had to do something, so I thought I would try to weaken the pawns in the center and get my bishop a little more active, but that allows him then to open up the diagonal for his bishop and threaten to trade it off. In order to avoid the trade, I went to an awkward square. It does dominate the knight because it controls these squares that the light squared knight might want to go to, but that's about all you can say for it, and it's just out of the way, and it really cedes this whole central long diagonal to the white bishop on g2. He played bishop e4, and that was an interesting idea. The possibility here is that he would sacrifice the bishop with bishop takes pawn, pawn takes back, queen takes check, and then possibly, although it wouldn't work right now, win this bishop, or at least have opened up my king's position. That's something that I have to look out for. I played my bishop to d4, thinking that the one kind of weak place that I could try to stir up some difficulty was on f2, next to his king. If this knight were to move here, that I have my queen and my bishop both on that square. But of course, it's easily avoided. And so the way he avoided it was to put the knight in the way, and now my bishop's no longer directly attacking f2. So I attacked his knight that's on d2. He took that opportunity to come into my position with check, king up, check. He wins a pawn, so now we're even in pawns. I came back. Okay, so he danced around a little bit. And then he retreated that knight that I had attacked back to f1. That gave me the opportunity for just a moment to look like I was doing something here, attacking this f2 square a second time again from a different direction. But that's easily defended with knight to d1. And I can attack that knight and pin his queen down a little bit, or so it seems, also attacking his bishop at the same time. But the problem is my king is too weak. And so he can maneuver his pieces at will very easily. So, he checked me. I played over, checked me again. Back in this position, of course, I was hoping for brain cramp like something silly like queen takes pawn to check me, so that my bishop could take him. But of course, Paul's much too good of a player to fall into that kind of beginner's trap. But anything can happen. So you got to at least make the put the possibilities out there and see if the guy could possibly fall into it. Anyhow, he checked me. I came up, and then his bishop moved out of trouble, threatening now to come in on e8. So that gave me a chance. That gave me one tempo to play my bishop to c4. So now I have a double attack on f1. Who knows? Maybe he won't see it. And if he doesn't check me, who knows what could happen. So he checked me with the bishop, and I was really hoping I could go somewhere that would cause him a problem and lose a tempo so I could take on f1. But of course, there's nothing to be seen there. I went to g7, and he can just simply check me there. Then we dance around a little bit. He checks me from h4 and then comes back and decides a better way to do it is from f8. And now the problem is that this queen on f8 is defending the pawn on f2. So that even that little cheapo of queen takes f1 mate is not going to work. And that gives him time also to bring his other knight into the game. If you look at it with Stockfish, of course, likes the mating sequence beginning with g4. And it looks like you're giving the pawn away with check, but of course, the knight then goes to g3 to block the check with a counter check. And from this position, after knight to e3, Black's game crumbles even faster, if that's possible. And there's just nothing to be done nothing useful to be done for Black against White's attack. So he did not do that, though. Instead, he developed the knight to e3, protecting the other knight, getting it out of harm's way, and supporting g4 so that he can push the pawn without having it taken. Nothing wrong with that move, certainly. I think the eval in Stockfish went from mate or plus 20 or something down to 7 or 8. But when you're winning, there's lots of ways to win, and as long as you see a route that's winning, it doesn't matter if there's a speculative way that you could have won even faster. Okay, so I attacked the knight a second time, hoping to win it if he didn't do something about it. But now he does have that g4 move. I played up, and he put me out of my misery. So it was a pretty ugly game on my part. I mean, I wasn't happy about it. Paul played, a nice, solid game. Didn't have to do anything too brilliant because I sort of handed it to him. Hopefully I'll give him a little better resistance next time that we play. I don't know what else to say about it, except that the lesson for me was the obvious one, that after I evaluate a combination of several moves, I should stop and pause midway and make sure that what I analyzed is still working, even though it's a mini combination. I'm not even sure I'd call it that. So that's it for this week. This is Roger Capello saying goodbye to you and see you next week from showing my week at the club. Bye-bye.